They found a prehistoric underground megastructure with no name. Near a mountain summit in North Caucasus, Russia, a narrow opening goes straight down into the rock. The walls inside are finished totally smooth, set at perfect angles, and lined the whole way down with fitted stone blocks so large they have no business being there.
Nobody builds something that big underground just for fun. You don't do that unless you have to.
It falls deeper than a 30-story building buried on its end. Almost no one outside Russia has heard of it. No university has surveyed it. No institution has dated it.
It's a wonderful mystery, and it deserves much further attention.
The only people who ever went inside carried rope and cameras. What they found matches no cave ever recorded on Earth. The shocking discovery of the shaft. The man who found it was not a professor, and he was not looking for a cave. His name was Arthur Zhemukov, and he was a Russian speleologist who studies and explores caves for a living. But Zhemukov was different from most people in his field. While other researchers treated local folklore as entertainment, he treated it as evidence. He had spent years cross-referencing the old Balkar stories, tales passed down for generations about vast underground cities and tunnels hidden beneath the Caucasus peaks, with wartime documents from the Second World War. That trail is how he found his way to the Kara Hora shaft. In 2011, after years of searching, he roped himself in and went down. The shaft opens into the mountain at Kara Hora Peak in the Kabardino-Balkaria Republic of the Russian Federation. Zhemukov and his team descended carefully, shoulder-width against smooth stone walls, in air that grew steadily colder the further down they went. The descent took over an hour. The vertical drop demanded full concentration because the narrow shaft left almost no room to correct a mistake. Then, without warning, the tight shaft opened. The team stopped moving. In front of them was a vast underground hall, its ceiling standing 36 meters overhead, about the height of a 12-story building held up inside the mountain. The walls were not bare rock. They were lined with enormous rectangular stone blocks, each one fitted to the next with seams so tight they were hard to see in the lamplight. Some of the blocks appeared to stand vertically, like columns, as if the structure had been deliberately engineered to support the ceiling above. Branching off from the hall in every direction were narrow passages. Some were too tight for a child to squeeze through. Some barely admitted a grown hand. Zhemukov and his team turned their lamps into these openings, and the light simply traveled on and did not come back. There was one more thing. Standing in the hall, the team felt it before they fully understood it. A slow, steady current of cool air rising past them from somewhere below. Not a draft from the entrance above, something coming up from the depths, which meant that wherever they were standing was not the bottom. The prehistoric underground megastructure they had just entered went further than anything their ropes or lights could follow. Why the scale is a problem. Let's start with the blocks themselves, because everything else follows from them. The explorers who measured the stones lining this shaft estimated that the largest weigh as much as 200 tons. That number needs to sit with you for a moment, because it has a point of comparison most people already know. The granite beams that roof the king's chamber inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, the ones considered among the most astonishing feats of construction in the ancient world, weigh around 80 tons each. The blocks fitted into this mountain are more than twice that weight. They sit deep underground, in a shaft at the top of a remote Caucasus peak, with no quarry beside them, no ramp, no road, and no sign at all of how they were moved into place. To lift even one of them today, you would need a heavy crane purpose-built for the task. And there is no level ground at that summit to set one on. The comfortable response to that is to shrug and say that ancient people simply did this kind of thing. But the word "simply" is doing a lot of quiet work there. It buries everything we actually do not understand. Look at Baalbek in Lebanon, because Baalbek is proof that the weight is not fantasy. 3 enormous cut blocks called the trilithons lie beneath the ruins of the Roman Temple of Jupiter. Each one measures over 19 meters in length and weighs approximately 900 metric tons, roughly 10 times the weight of the largest stones used in the Great Pyramid, and about 36 times the weight of the stones at Stonehenge. They were transported from a quarry over half a mile away and raised to a height of 9 meters on top of other 400-ton blocks. The Romans, who documented nearly every major construction project they ever undertook, left no record of how this was done. But then, the trilithon blocks do not even contain the Lewis holes that Roman engineers drilled into stones before lifting them. Whatever placed those blocks, it was not standard Roman engineering. The quarry at Baalbek makes the problem harder. Still sitting in the ground nearby is the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, a single unfinished monolith approximately 60-80 feet long and weighing over 1,200 tons. In 2014, a team from the German Archaeological Institute excavated further and found something even larger directly beneath it. A block now called the Forgotten Stone, weighing an estimated 1,650 tons. It is the largest quarried stone block ever recorded anywhere in the world. It has never been moved. No one has ever been able to explain how it was intended to be moved. So the 200-ton blocks in the Kara-Hora shaft are not impossible on their own. Baalbek has proven that human hands achieved far greater things at some point in the past. What they prove, taken together, is that the method has vanished. Whether it was lost technology, forgotten technique, or something that was never written down, the knowledge of how these stones were moved is gone. And once you accept that the weight was achievable and the method is lost, the question stops being about engineering. It becomes something stranger. Why would anyone go to this effort, deep inside a mountain, for a structure that no human being was apparently ever meant to walk through? The absence of human trace. The question of purpose should have had obvious answers. Every worked structure humans have ever built leaves behind a signature, the trace of what it was used for. A tomb holds the dead. A temple holds smoke, altars, and prayers scratched into the walls. A mine holds the scars of extraction and the rubble of what was hauled away. These are how archaeologists actually read a space and understand what happened inside it. The Kara-Hora shaft holds none of it. There were no stairs, ladders, or footholds cut into the rock. Without modern rope, there is no means at all of moving through the shaft, which means anyone who built this place had no way of revisiting it, at least not by the route that exists now. A structure you can build but cannot enter is not a building in any sense most people would recognize. There was also no soot on the walls. This detail becomes important when you realize that people who go underground carry fire. Torches and oil lamps leave their black signature on stone, and that signature survives for thousands of years. The absence of soot is a record of the absence of fire. Whatever happened inside this shaft, it happened without light, or it happened before any human hand held a torch in it. There were no inscriptions, no carvings, no offerings, no pottery, no bones. No human debris was there. So the passage is too narrow to enter. The Great Hall with its 36-meter ceiling, the fitted stone blocks, all of it existed in absolute silence. Vadim Chernobrov, who led the Kosmopoisk research group and mapped the parts of the shaft accessible by rope, noted that the structure shared something specific with the unexplained shafts inside the Egyptian pyramids. Those shafts that run deep beneath the pyramid complex and lead to chambers no one can name a purpose for also show no burn marks on the walls. No hieroglyphs, no artifacts, no evidence of human habitation or religious use, and no way for a person to move through them without equipment that did not exist in the ancient world. Chernobrov's conclusion was that both structures were built for a purpose that was not human movement, not transit, ritual, or storage. Then there is the air. A slow, steady current rises from somewhere below the lowest point the team could reach. Air moves through a structure because somewhere at depth there is hollow space connected to the surface. The consistent, cool, and continuous current means the portions of this prehistoric underground megastructure that anyone has ever seen are, at best, the entrance to something. The part below remains entirely unexplored. Engineering that has a clear purpose is difficult enough to explain when the builders are unknown. Engineering with no purpose that anyone can name is a different kind of problem. And that's why researchers have started to ask if the mountain could have done this by itself. Possibility of a natural occurrence. Before anything else, this geological argument deserves to be heard at full strength, because it is not a weak argument. Volcanoes genuinely do strange things to rock, and the mountain at Kara is volcanic. The rock it is made of is tuff, the material left behind when volcanic ash, fragments, and gases fuse together under heat and pressure. Tuff has specific fracture behavior. It can split along flat, clean planes. It can break into slabs that look from a distance as if they were sawn. And in some volcanic formations, cooling draws the stone into tall, regular columns. So even and upright that early European travelers who first encountered basalt columns at places like the Giant's Causeway in Ireland genuinely believed they were the work of ancient giants. Nature, left entirely alone, can produce shapes that look intentional. Any honest account of this shaft has to start by admitting that. The explorers who went down were prepared to find exactly that. They went in with the geological explanation in hand, ready to apply it. But what they found made it impossible to. Volcanic rock, when it fractures into columns, produces shapes with 5 and 6 sides, hexagons and pentagons, the geometry of a natural cooling pattern. However, the shaft is full of right angles, the geometry of a carpenter or a mason. When stone splits along a natural fracture plane, the surface wanders. It bows, drifts, and curves as the crack travels through uneven material. The walls of this shaft hold parallel and true for 40 meters without straying. Natural fracture fields are laced through with cracks running in multiple directions. The explorers reported none of the slanting cracks that appear in every natural volcanic formation. Then there is the binding. Packed into the seams between the stone blocks, the team found what appeared to be a binding material, the same way a mason fills the joints in a wall. No volcanic process anywhere on Earth has ever been observed mixing mortar and laying it into a seam. It is simply not something that happens. The absence of oblique cracks and the diagonal fissures that run through all tuff formations as a natural consequence of how the rock settles was one of the observations that most clearly distinguished the shaft from any known natural formation. Every tuff cave system studied carries these cracks. Kara carries none. Combined with the right angles, the parallel walls, and the binding material, the explorers concluded that there were no analogues for this structure anywhere among known cave systems in the world. That conclusion lands the question exactly where it needs to be. Not whether this structure is artificial, but who built it, when, and with what. The civilizations that lived in the mountains. One way to dismiss a discovery is to treat it as isolated, as if the thing found has no context, no relatives, no place in any wider picture. The Kara shaft gets treated this way often, like an anomaly, an outlier, something that sits alone and therefore cannot be taken seriously. But the North Caucasus is one of the oldest worked landscapes in the world, and the closer you look at the ground around it, the less alone the shaft begins to seem. Around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, a culture rose in the northern foothills of this same mountain range that archaeologists now call the Maycop. These were not simple herding communities. They worked gold, silver, and arsenic bronze. They raised great burial mounds over their dead, and at a site called Zartskaya, their builders constructed a stone burial chamber whose design runs directly into the dolmen tradition of the broader region. Across the western Caucasus today, around 3,000 of those dolmens still stand, chambers of dressed stone slabs fitted at clean right angles, a number of them with perfectly round holes bored straight through a single solid face of rock. 5,000 years ago, The hands working in these mountains were already shaping stone with patience and precision. Travel south across the range into Georgia and the rock itself becomes a town. At Uplistsikh, an entire settlement was carved straight into a cliff face, with halls, chambers, and passages hollowed from living stone, inhabited from the early Iron Age around 3,000 years ago and continuously for centuries after. In the same republic that holds Kara-Hora, a high gorge contains a cluster of medieval stone tombs that local people call the City of the Dead. Far younger than the others, but telling, for age upon age, the people of these mountains have answered the landscape in stone. Then there is the harder question of how far real skill can reach backward into time. For that, look south to the highlands of Anatolia. At Göbekli Tepe and the nearby site of Karahan Tepe, hunters and gatherers raised great carved pillars of stone more than 11,000 years ago, the oldest monuments of their kind anywhere on the planet, erected thousands of years before the first city, before the wheel, before a single line of writing existed anywhere. Archaeologists are still lifting them from the ground. As recently as 2023, excavations at Karahan Tepe uncovered a carved human figure more than 2 meters tall. A generation ago, every textbook agreed that no one at that stage of human development could have built such things. The stones disagreed. The category of impossible for this period has a poor track record. The idea of a finished functional space hidden underground is not unusual in this part of the world either. In Cappadocia, Turkey, the underground city of Derinkuyu descends 85 meters into the earth across 18 levels of rooms, stables, and chapels kept ventilated through more than 50 hidden shafts. In China, the Longyu caverns were cut by hand over 2,000 years ago. They were vast, precise, and geometrically regular, and not a single historical record survives to identify who made them or why. On Malta, the Hal-Saflieni hypogeum was carved 3 stories down into bedrock, its chambers shaped specifically to echo the temples that stood above ground in daylight. None of this requires a single lost civilization that spanned the world. It requires something simpler and, in its own way, stranger. That again and again, in places that never met and never communicated, human beings went down into the earth and built. The Kara-Hora shaft has a family. It is simply the largest and most silent member of it. And the more sinister bit is that it seemed a group already knew of its existence even before it was discovered. Why the Nazis were looking for this? Arthur Zhemikov did not find the shaft by accident, and the trail he followed to reach it is almost as strange as the shaft itself. During the Second World War in the summer of 1942, German forces launched Operation Edelweiss, a major military push into the Caucasus aimed at capturing the oil-rich regions of the Soviet South, particularly the Baku oil fields in Azerbaijan. Securing those resources was essential to the German war effort. But among the soldiers who moved into the mountains was a different kind of researcher, with a different kind of objective. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, had founded an institution called the Ahnenerbe, formerly titled the Research and Teaching Society for Ancestral Heritage. Its stated mission was to study the origins of the Aryan race, but its real function went considerably further. The Ahnenerbe ran expeditions across the world to find evidence of ancient civilizations that Nazi ideology claimed as Aryan ancestors. In 1938 and 1939, an expedition led by SS officer Ernst Schaefer traveled to Tibet, officially for anthropological and botanical research, but with a hidden mandate: investigate the myths surrounding Shambhala, a legendary underground kingdom said to preserve ancient knowledge and advance technology from a vanished civilization. The Nazi leadership believed that access to whatever Shambhala contained could change the outcome of the war. The Caucasus interested the Ahnenerbe for the same reasons. The region's ancient legends described vast underground cities built by civilizations that had since disappeared, exactly the kind of trace they were looking for. When Operation Edelweiss brought German forces into the mountains, Ahnenerbe researchers came with them. They reached these slopes, leaving marks on the stone, And near the entrance to the Kara Hora shaft, carved into a boulder at the summit, is a swastika. It was left by German researchers who were, by all evidence, close enough to know where they were. That would be unusual on its own. What makes it stranger is that a second swastika was found in the same area, older, with no connection to the Germans. You should also know that the swastika is one of the oldest symbols in human history. Across Central Asia and the Caucasus, it appears in pre-Christian and pre-modern contexts as a symbol of life, cycles, and natural energy, long predating its appropriation by the Nazi Party. But the presence of both markings in the same location, one ancient and one wartime, raises a question that has never been answered. Did the ancient builders of this structure also leave that mark? And if so, were the Nazis following a trail laid by the same hands that cut the stone? This is the question that pulled Zhemukov to the mountain. He had been studying the documents and traces left by German researchers during the Caucasus campaign for years. The wartime records, combined with the old Balkar legends about buried underground cities, pointed to a specific location. He followed both threads until they converged at a rock face with a narrow vertical opening in it. The legends themselves were not vague. Across Kabardino-Balkaria, oral traditions had preserved stories about narrow shafts going deep into the mountains, stone passageways too precise to be natural, communities that once lived underground and left behind cities that no one had seen for centuries. These stories were preserved for generations, and Zhemukov believed that oral history carried real geographic memory. That belief led him to the shaft, and the shaft, it turned out, was real. What the legends actually said. The legends of the North Caucasus are not vague ghost stories. They are specific. Generations of Balkar and Kabardian communities preserved these accounts, passing them around fires, eventually recording them in collections of regional folklore. Most researchers who heard them filed them as mythology. A few took them seriously enough to look. What those traditions describe maps, in considerable detail, onto what Zhemukov actually found. The stories mentioned stone corridors with straight edges and flat walls, not the rough, winding tunnels of a natural cave. They mentioned passages that went deeper than torchlight could follow. They mentioned the sense that something was built, not formed. None of that specificity was invented after the discovery. It was preserved before it. In the broader Caucasus region, the tradition of underground construction was not purely legend. Archaeological surveys have documented real subterranean sites throughout the mountains going back thousands of years. The local stories sat with physical evidence of a culture that had genuinely gone underground before. That context made it easier to take the legends seriously as geographic memory. Zhemukov believed he was at the beginning of something much larger. After the initial expedition and the mapping work done by Chernobrov's Kosmopoisk team, he spoke publicly about his conviction that Kara Hora was one entrance among many, that the mountain range held further structures, other shafts, other chambers not yet found. He was planning further expeditions into the region when the research stopped. In 2015, Arthur Zhemukov was struck by a car. He died. The day before the accident, he had reported making a significant new find related to the Kara Hora investigation, but whatever he had found died with him. 2 years later, in 2017, Vadim Chernobrov, who had led the Kosmopoisk expeditions, mapped the shaft and produced the first television documentary about it, also died from cancer. He was 51. 3 additional people connected to the research into the shaft also died in the years following the initial expeditions. The deaths are documented. What they mean is genuinely unclear. There is no confirmed evidence of foul play in any of these cases, and it would be dishonest to call this a conspiracy without evidence. However, it would be equally dishonest to say the timing is unremarkable. What can be said clearly is that the people most responsible for what the world knows about Kara Hora are dead. The questions they raised are unanswered, and no one has picked up where they left off. theories that was never proven. The hardest truth about the Kara-Hora shaft is that almost every question raised by this place could be answered by a single week of proper scientific work. A thin slice of the stone wall examined under a microscope would confirm to a geologist definitively whether the surface was carved by a tool or formed by cooling. A sample of the binding material packed into the seams could be chemically analyzed in a standard laboratory, establishing within days whether it is true mortar or a mineral deposit that formed naturally. A proper survey of the shaft using modern equipment would map exactly how far those passages run, where they lead, and where the air current is coming from. Carbon dating on any organic material in the binding, if it exists, would give a minimum age for the construction. None of this is expensive relative to routine archaeological work. None of it requires technology that does not exist. And none of it has ever been done. This is because the Kara-Hora shaft is simply in an extremely hard-to-reach location in one of the most rugged and forgotten corners of the Russian Caucasus. And no university, archaeological body, or government science agency has ever decided the climb was worth making. Before his death, Vadim Chernobrov had proposed the shaft could have been a resonator, a structure designed to interact with sound or natural vibration in ways we no longer understand. He also raised the possibility of seismological function, a device built to detect or respond to movement in the earth. But he acknowledged he was speculating. Some other researchers suggested it might serve energy function, a chamber designed to concentrate or channel something from the earth itself, though no one has been specific about what that mechanism would look like. The most structurally bold theory is that Kara-Hora is the underground foundation of a pyramid that once stood above ground on the mountain surface and has since been destroyed or buried, leaving only the base deep inside the rock, with the superstructure long gone. The pyramid theory has some surface appeal. The polished walls, the precise block construction, and the dimensional similarities to the Grand Gallery inside the Pyramid of Khufu have been noted multiple times. Zhemukov himself pointed to this comparison. If there was a larger structure, and if it stood above the peak and has since collapsed or eroded over thousands of years, what survives underground might be all that is left. Unfortunately, none of these theories can be tested with what currently exists. The only recent documentation of the site comes from Alexander Splashnov, a private individual who made the climb in 2017 and 2018 and uploaded 2 albums of photographs to the Russian social network Vkontakte. His images are the clearest visual record of the shaft that exists. They show the geometric precision of the walls, the scale of the megalithic blocks, the smooth polished surfaces, and stone formations in the area surrounding the entrance that appear to show additional precisely cut blocks buried beneath vegetation and soil. Splashnov also photographed what appear to be machine-like marks on the surfaces of stones near the entrance, parallel striations of a kind that have been documented at other prehistoric megalithic sites, including Baalbek in Lebanon and the Yangshan Quarry in China. Whether those marks are the same phenomenon, and what made them, is not known. But their presence in the photographs adds another layer to a site that already has too many unanswered questions and too little formal attention. What remains in the end is a list of things that are true. There are stones inside that mountain heavier than the ceiling of the Great Pyramid. They are fitted together at right angles that volcanic tuff does not form on its own. They wall a shaft that drops past anything a living person can climb down into a hall that no one left a single trace of using. Off that hall run passages too narrow to enter, with a current of cool air rising steadily from a darkness that no light has touched. And all around it stand mountains that human hands have been carving, tunneling, and dressing for at least 5,000 years. The proof that would settle the question has never been gathered. The prehistoric underground megastructure at Kara-Hora has no name in any academic record. It has no entry in any formal archaeological database. It has a hole in a mountaintop, a handful of photographs, and a question that has been sitting in the dark for however many thousands of years it has been there, waiting for someone to decide it is worth answering. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more fascinating stories.